An act of self-defense and an assault on the heart of ISIS. That's how British Prime Minister David Cameron described a drone strike targeting Jihadi John, the masked face of the terror group. U.S. authorities now working to figure out whether that hit worked and that Jihadi John is indeed dead. A senior U.S. official tells CNN authorities are confident, though, Jihadi John was indeed taken out. In the meantime, Kurdish troops force ISIS militants to run. They liberate the key Iraqi town of Sinjar. American forces helping in that effort with airstrikes. The president said the U.S. has ISIS on the retreat, although Donald Trump has other ideas on how to fight the terrorist group. Let's listen.
I know more about ISIS than the generals do, believe me. I would bomb the out of them. I would just bomb those suckers. And that's right. I'd blow up the pipes. I'd blow up the I'd blow up every single inch. There would be nothing left. And you know what? You'll get Exxon to come in there in 2 months. You ever see these guys, how good they are, the great oil companies? They'll rebuild that sucker brand new. It'll be beautiful. And I'd ring it, and I'd take the oil.
All right, let's talk about this with CNN military analyst Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. Okay, so General, why even bother with the Kurds? Why bother convincing them to fight ISIS on the ground? Why not just bomb out of Iraq?
Well, I would suggest, Carol, that Mr. Trump might want to take a visit to Iraq or some of the combat areas and see how things actually work on the ground. It's now getting into the scary category. He is talking about things that he knows very little about. It's not only a little bit scary, but it's also dangerous, and it's also immoral. You just don't do that. Americans don't fight wars by carpet bombing nations. And I think if he were on the ground in Iraq or Syria and he would see the population that is in dire fear of ISIS and how they are intermingling with the population, I think he would have a better perspective. I think it might also be interesting to get him into that country when other organizations like Mobil or Exxon have attempted to try and repair some of the oil works, because I was there when that occurred, and it's very challenging, truthfully.
Why is it challenging?
Well, I mean, this is an applause line for Mr. Trump, and a lot of people, again, I'd remind folks that less than 1% of the American population has served in the military, and even a fewer percentage of the population has served in these kind of areas. So you just don't know what it's like. When other countries are under conflict, under siege like this, it's hard, extremely hard, to reestablish both their economic and their industrial capacity once they are bombed. There are people living there. There are 11 million people in northern Iraq where the oil fields are, and not all of them are ISIS supporters. In fact, very, very few are. So when you're talking about dropping bombs, first of all, you got to have targets to drop bombs on. It's an applause line for people who have never been there and have never seen what it's like.
But you know, you'd think that history would give us a clue, right? Because we went into Baghdad, we overthrew Saddam Hussein. We're good at that. The U.S. military is great at that. It's what's after we're not so great about, because we didn't have in place someone who would run the country.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And you recall the great touting of the shock and awe campaign in 2003 when we did go into Iraq. That shock and awe was actually contributing to the inability to reestablish essential services to the country. There are also some decisions made in terms of the governmental officials and how they aren't there to run the country. This is the hard work of politics. This is the hard work of conflict that Mr. Trump is not talking a lot about. And again, I'm trying to remain apolitical in this, but it's increasingly difficult to do that when you hear these kinds of statements of individuals who have not been there, who don't know more than the generals do, and in fact, in many cases, don't know more than the privates do.
Okay, so General, if your commander-in-chief said, go into Iraq and just bomb it to smithereens, how would you react?
Well, I would react by, first of all, trying to inform him of the laws of land warfare and the Geneva Conventions that are involved in this, and how it is not only immoral but illegal to do that. And I would not be privy or I would not be a partner to these kinds of things, because it would put me as a commander before the the Hague courts. And if he persisted in saying bomb it, I think what you would eventually have in the military across the board is mass resignations. And that's a tough stance to take, Carol, but truthfully, that's what would occur. Because the American military studies these kinds of things. They know the moral and the values implications associated with these kind of decisions. They will attempt to persuade their leaders the right approaches to take and the various options available, but they won't do things illegally or immorally.
All right, General Hertling, thank you so much. I do appreciate your being with me today. I'll be right back.
Thank you, Carol.